U.S. President Joe Biden will host South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol at the White House later today in Washington, D.C. Yoon and Biden will hold a state dinner at the White House, just the second time Biden has held such an event. On Thursday, Yoon will address a joint session of the U.S. Congress. The state visit reflects the strengthening of the U.S. South Korea alliance, which this year marks its 70th anniversary. But the allies also face unprecedented challenges. VOA correspondent Chris Casejo joins us now live from Washington, D.C. with more. Hello, Chris. Thank you for joining our program.
Good morning from Washington, D.C.
We're very happy to have you of course, to talk to you a little bit more about the imminent meeting between the two leaders, U.S. President Joe Biden and South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol at the White House later today. What do you think will be the biggest issue that the two leaders will discuss, Chris?
Definitely North Korea. Maybe the biggest question is whether South Koreans trust U.S. promises to help defend their country against its neighbor. With the nuclear-armed North now able to threaten the U.S. mainland, some South Koreans question whether Washington would really intervene in a conflict. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Monday promised a major announcement regarding extended deterrence or how far the U.S. will go to protect its ally from North Korea's nuclear threat. VOA has learned that South Korea will declare it won't pursue nuclear weapons in exchange for Washington agreeing for Seoul to have more say in the decision-making process in extended deterrence and contingency planning, as well as additional assurances that the Biden administration is serious in its commitment to protect South Korea against attacks. This is according to a senior administration official. 64% of South Koreans support their country developing its own nuclear weapons to deal with North Korea, according to a poll released Friday by the Seoul-based Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Now, this finding is consistent with numerous polls taken in recent years. South Korean President Yoon had said earlier this year that South Korea would eventually and could eventually acquire its own nuclear weapons if its security concerns were not addressed. Now, to reassure South Koreans, the U.S. military has sent its biggest weapons, including long-range bombers and nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, to participate in highly visible military exercises with South Korea. The allies have also increased high-level defense coordination, including by holding a discussion-based exercise meant to give South Korean officials a better idea of U.S. thinking on the hypothetical usage of nuclear weapons. Back to you.
Now, Chris, another contentious topic between the two allies is, of course, the war in Ukraine, where South Korea so far has been quite reluctant to help U.S., to say the least, to arm Ukraine, which is now fighting still the Russian invasion. Do you know more about this?
Yes, let me give you a little bit of background. South Korea has not approved the sale or donation of weapons to Ukraine, citing domestic laws that regulate sending arms to war zones, although South Korea is among the world's largest weapons exporters. So to get around it, South Korea has instead approved the sale of massive quantities of South Korean-made weapons to countries such as Poland and the United States, which are the ones arming Ukraine. Ahead of his U.S. visit, President Yoon appeared to soften his stance on this issue. He told Reuters last week that South Korea could provide more than just humanitarian and economic aid if Ukraine suffered a large-scale civilian attack. But in an interview with the Washington Post published on Monday, Yoon appeared to walk back that statement, suggesting Seoul must also consider its relationship with Russia. The issue of helping to arm Ukraine is controversial in South Korea. An opinion poll released Monday showed that 65% of South Koreans oppose sending military aid to Ukraine. Back to you.
So a lot of security issues will be discussed between the two leaders. It'll be interesting to hear what the statements that will be delivered at the press conference later. But now let's talk more about the U.S. trade policy, as it also affects South Korea, and it is also a point of contention between the two countries. Could you tell us more about this, Chris?
Yes. President Yoon faces significant domestic pressure to push back on a new U.S. law that makes South Korean electric vehicles less competitive here in the U.S. market. U.S. President Joe Biden's signature Inflation Reduction Act offers tax credits of up to $7,500 to buyers of electric vehicles assembled here in North America. The bill signed last year was meant to exclude China from supply chains and boost U.S. production of electric cars, but it also wiped out tax credits for dozens of electric vehicles manufactured outside the U.S., including those from South Korea. Some South Korea officials have expressed concerns about another piece of U.S. legislation, the U.S. Chips and Science Act, which provides incentives and sets other requirements on semiconductor makers that set up production facilities in the United States. The legislation has prompted some Seoul commentators to conclude that the United States no longer espouses its traditional free trade values.
All right, Chris, President Yoon has been in the U.S. since the beginning of the week. And since then, he has announced something that has captured a lot of people's attentions, which is the investment from streaming video giant Netflix. Maybe you know more about this and maybe about other business deals that would affect a lot of people's lives in the world?
Yes, Netflix Inc. said on Tuesday it plans to invest 2.5 billion US dollars in South Korea over the next 4 years to produce Korean TV series, movies, and unscripted shows, which is doubling the amount the company has invested in the market since 2016. Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos and President Yoon met at the White House on Monday. President Yoon welcomed the investment as a major opportunity for South Korea's content industry and Netflix as the country seeks to increase cultural exports and soft power. Known as the Korean Wave or Hallyu, South Korea's entertainment industry has boomed globally since the 2000s, the mid 2000s, that is. The 2021 release Squid Game remains Netflix's most watched series ever, having racked up 1.65 billion hours of streaming by 111 million users in its first 28 days on the platform. So this is obviously big news for Netflix and obviously big news for South Korean content creators. Back to you.
Chris, thank you so much for your enlightening insights about the relations between the U.S. and South Korea and what we can expect from the meeting of the two leaders that will happen really soon. Thank you, Chris, for joining us and have a great day in Washington, D.C.
You too.